it's a small enough group we can do that. And, be good to, I don't know some of you, so and you probably don't know me either. I'm Dave Dubois. I'm the state climatologist for New Mexico. I'm based out of NMSU, just across next building over. So been here for about 2 years, and I'll start on this side. Whoever wants to go on this side.
I'm Laurel Smith. I'm from the Department of Geography and Environmental Sustainability at the University of Oklahoma.
I'm a part of AMSA. I'm the technical coordinator for the South Central Climate Science Center, and so I do most of the day-to-day organizing things, keeping things running, and working with the PIs on the project.
I'm Jim Lanehouse. I'm acting as the Deputy Director for the Southwest Climate Science Center in Tucson. I'm just here to kind of see how this rollout is going and learn a few things for our own rollout.
I'm Amy Robertson with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm the Science Coordinator for the Desert Landscape Conservation Corps.
I'm Michael Baca. I'm with the New Mexico Environment Department here in Las Cruces with the Air Quality Group.
I'm Warren Sharp. I'm a hydraulic engineer with the Bureau of Reclamation in Albuquerque.
I'm Val McLean. I'm the Science and Operations Officer of the National Weather Service in Santa Teresa.
I'm Joel Brown. I'm with USDA, Natural Resources Conservation Service. I'm attached to the National Soil Survey Center in Lincoln, but I'm located just across the parking lot in Newton Hall with the Tornado Experimental Range and Tornado Basin LTER.
Hi, I'm Brian Hurd. I'm here at NMSU in agricultural economics, and have been working in climate change impacts, particularly on water resources and agricultural resources for quite a while now. And
I'm Mohamed Zawani, and from NMSU Civil Engineering Department, and my advisor is Leka King.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Andrea Mendoza. I'm the District 4 Manager for the Office of the State Engineer here at Las Cruces.
I'm James Stalker. I have a research company here in Las Cruces. It produces high-resolution weather and climate data.
I'm Phil King. I'm a professor in civil engineering here at NMSU and Commons Advisor.
Woody Irvin, I'm a planning engineer from Reclamation in El Paso.
Kim Whitman, I'm Director for the South Central Climate Science Center.
Renee McPherson, I'm the Director of Research for the South Central Climate Science Center and Associate Professor in the University of Oklahoma Department of Geography and Environmental Sustainability.
Great, and you guys, we're going around, just introduce yourselves. And, next.
My name is Daryl Maltine. I'm with Navajo Agricultural Products Industry in Farmington. I'm CFO.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ryan Garcia, the Assistant Crop Manager in the Corn Department, also from Matthews. I graduated from here this past May. So, hello.
Hi.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Renee Pablo, and I'm with Navajo Agricultural Products Industry.
Welcome, Renee.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah. So we're ready to just go ahead and go through. Okay. Thank you. I just want to say another welcome to everybody driving in from Farmington, flying in different places, and I appreciate everybody coming today. So I just wanted to, this purpose of this meeting is a rollout, just to introduce, I'm sure you guys will talk a lot about, describe the center, but I think this is kind of a unique opportunity to see these various different regional organizations coming together. I know that I've been following these other organizations from different agencies, like we already have like the state climate offices from almost all the 50 states. NOAA has several organizations. There's regional climate centers. There's 6 of those. There's regional integrated science and assessments, or RISAs, and a few of us are part of that. I think there's 11 of those around, scattered all over, including Alaska and Hawaii. There's also this, what we'll talk about today, these Department of Interior Climate Science Centers. I think there's 8 of them. Is that correct? There's 8 of those. And there's also, we'll also be talking about the landscape conservation cooperatives, which also are run out of the Department of Interior. I think there's 22 of those, if I'm not, I just looked up the website. And there's also 6 NOAA Regional Climate Services Directors. So there's various regional things going on in terms of climate services in the U.S. and it's very interesting to see how they are connected geographically and in terms of the different topics they're looking at. And I think you coming to this meeting is a good sign that there's looking for collaboration just to see what's going on with this organization. We, a lot of in this area, even though we share with the plains, the Texas. Yeah, you want to see that? There's we share a lot of the common things. If you haven't been looking at the news or looking out the window, I mean we've had we're in the middle of a drought that's pretty severe and it has impacted a lot of our economy. There's been a lot of problems with wildfires. New Mexico has had the largest wildfire. It was like 2 years in a row, the largest wildfires, and I'm sure Oklahoma and other states have having seen patterns like that. And so we're seeing a lot of the same kind of things in this region. So I think there's a lot of commonalities, and at least for me, I'm looking for some things not only to learn about what the Climate Science Center is, but looking at the ways that we can collaborate, and develop ways we can cope with a changing climate. Welcome, come on in.
Thanks.
So I think it's very important. I mean, we're looking at just looking at the climate over New Mexico, and it was kind of an interesting point. The last 2 years, starting from last month and going back 2 years, was the warmest 2-year chunk in New Mexico, in records, and also in terms of precip. The last 2 years was also the driest on record. So we're coming off these extreme events that we've seen them before in the 50s. So how are we changing our patterns? Compared to then and now. And there's a lot more people living in New Mexico and in all the other states. And how are we coping with that for the next time it happens? What are we going to do? So I just like to. I'm going to just announce the speakers, and we have 4 today. We've got Dr. Kim Winton, Director of South Central Climate Center, and then we'll start off. Then we'll have Dr. Renee McPherson, State Climatologist for Oklahoma and the Director of Research at the center, and then Amy Robertson, the Science Coordinator with the Desert LCC, will talk, and then and I think we'll have Laurel Smith with the University of Oklahoma talk about the tribal area. So I think we're just going to start according to the agenda with Kim.
Kim Winton. I am a native of Oklahoma, and I have a bachelor's degree in zoology from Oklahoma State, a master's in agriculture, particularly weed science, from Oklahoma State, and did my PhD work in weed science at University of Arkansas. And then I worked in the chemical industry doing environmental safety and environmental fate and effects. How does a compound break down in the environment? Does it absorb? Does it leach? What are the metabolites? This type of thing. And then spent 2 years at the EPA National Groundwater Risk Management Lab, and then have been 10 years at the Oklahoma Water Science Center for USGS, being the director of that. So I'm hoping that I speak 3 languages: ecology, biology, agriculture, and water. So I hope that this particular position is a lot about partnerships and corresponding, but I think it's important. Well, I don't know that I'm really a technical expert at anything anymore, but hopefully that type of background will aid and assist in bringing together the right technical groups to produce good products. So today's presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the creation of the Climate Science Centers and this particular Climate Science Center and how it is related to the other Climate Science Centers. As Dave mentioned, there are 8 nationwide. I have a list of the 2012 projects that were funded and give you just a little bit of information about those. And then focus a little bit on how we can work together and the mechanisms by which to interface with the Climate Science Center. So the USGS already had the National Climate Change and Wildlife Science Center in headquarters. And this was focused really primarily on wildlife. But the Department of Interior also saw this as an opportunity to look at all climate science and how it relates to the ecosystems, not just the wildlife itself. Secretarial Order 3289 actually formally established the climate science centers. They were in the process of building regional hubs, but this officially named them the climate science centers on a regional basis. And again, this is to address the impacts of climate change on America's water, land, and other natural and cultural resources. So who is served by the climate science centers? Yep. The LCCs, Landscape Conservation Cooperatives, were formed at the same time by this same secretarial order, and they were originally viewed as our main customers. But with that said, because of the structure, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, I think they really should be more seen as any stakeholder out there who's a land manager or manages cultural resources. I think any of those are entities to which we should be providing services and support and information. The other thing is each of the LCCs have a stakeholder group and input mechanisms, and then those ultimately would roll up to the climate science centers. So keep that in mind as well. And regarding climate science, I mean, these are very complicated problems, and only looking at one issue is not really going to give you the best management solutions. So again, these were developed to bring together these partnerships. The climate science centers are really a new paradigm. They're looking at being able to link the physical, biological, and even the social sciences. Bring these together to generate scenario forecasts, evaluate what the future possibilities may be. We want to be able to link the research, modeling, synthesis, and monitoring in a landscape or systems approach. Not protecting 1 acre for one particular species, but being able to manage and adapt at a landscape scale and have the tools to best predict what those outcomes might be. We want science collaboration. We want resource management collaboration as well. And the stakeholders set the priorities for these. This is not Department of Interior saying, here's your do list, go forth and do good things. It's driven from the ground up, having multiple ways for stakeholders to voice what their needs are, to produce and share information. The stakeholders also set the priorities and help us do the review. And again, as I mentioned earlier, sharing data and information, evaluating different ways to do that.
Kim, can I, in your capacity as director, how do you perceive, when you say stakeholders, what do you perceive your stakeholders to?
I think it's going to vary per area, but anybody who, and it may be a little more clear as I go through the process, I'll tell you how they're structured a little bit more, but anybody who manages land or natural or cultural resources, private landowners.
Okay.
I mean,
I was just one. It wasn't clear is NMSU a stakeholder or something else in your perception.
I think they would be a partner and or stakeholder. Let me go ahead and show you the structure of it, and it might help me frame the answer a little better. So for each of the USGS science centers, each of the climate science centers, there's at least one host university. And then in the case of South Central, there's an entire consortium. So within the South Central we have, well, I'll show you that on the next slide too, but but there's multiple universities and other federal agencies and 2 tribal nations that are represented as actual consortium members. So it's not just the USGS out there by themselves, it's functionality of this whole group together for the case of the South Central. So in my mind, to address your question, these are at least the ground level folks that will provide the science information back out. But there's, we also want to establish the links and partnerships to all of the universities, all of the science agencies within this general area. There's a stakeholder advisory council, and what this is, again, these should be bottom-up driven. The stakeholder advisory council is the executive level entity that will help us frame and prioritize our strategic plan, like our 5-year long-term plan. These are the big science topics that we need to be addressing. So for example, the types of people that would be on this stakeholder advisory council would be senior executive service level people, the head of the Region 4 National Park Service, the head of Fish and Wildlife, the regional director for USGS, the state agency heads, the tribal leaders might be on that level. So again, that's the 5-year plan and the very high level science priority setting. There will also be a science implementation panel, the SIP, and these are more the technical folks. This is the tactical plan, the year-to-year tactical plan. Okay, we've generated, what data do we need to generate? That's year 1. Year 2, what are our data gaps? What do the data say? 3rd year, okay, we've run some models. What does that mean? And again, that group helps us review proposals. It helps us, again, set forth the step-by-step process year to year. So 5-year strategic plan, year-to-year tactical plan. And then the science agenda and the science plan, again, the science agenda is the 5-year plan, and the science plan is the year-to-year, step-by-step process. And then there will also be offer the government-to-government consultation with the tribes as well. A perspective of each of the different colors is a different climate science center. So here's South Central. So there's 8 nationwide, and they're very consciously represented with fuzzy boundaries. So even though the primary footprint for us is New Mexico, Texas, and Oklahoma, I mean, I still want to be coordinating with Southeast because we've got this huge Gulf area. I still want to be coordinating with this group. I still want to be coordinating with this group. I mean, there are some activities that all of the climate science centers will be doing, and we want to make sure that we do that in a consistent manner. And then I think in the long haul, each of the climate science centers too will take on their own specialties. So, and notice too, again, part of you can't see them well on here, but there are multiple LCCs that cross any of the different climate science center fuzzy boundaries too. So same thing, we want to be able to make sure that we're integrating with all of those partners and sharing the data sets. So the science approach here, it's not showing one of my slides. So for the science approach, again, we've got the short-term tactical research. Again, that's the year-to-year plan that the scientific investigation panel helps us put together. We have the long-term strategic research plan, executive level, five-year plan. And then the types of things that we want to be doing are the advanced applications, developing the conceptual models, developing modeling applications that help us make decisions. Visualization tools, I think, are going to be very important, and statistical analysis tools. There will be some degree of monitoring going on, and again, that may happen at the consortium level or the individual university level or partner level, but bringing all of this together, looking at the long-term monitoring, cyclical type of monitoring, and then development of adaptive management strategies based on that monitoring. So Amy's going to talk more about the desert LCC, and this is just to give you a perspective of within our general footprint. We have 6 landscape conservation cooperatives that touch the fuzzy boundaries of the South Central Climate Science Center. So we have the desert, we have the eastern tallgrass prairie and big rivers, we have the Great Plains, we have the Gulf Coast Prairie, Gulf Coast Plains and Ozarks, and the Southern Rockies. And ultimately, we want to be able to produce, like I say, we want to make sure we have the partnerships, make sure we're sharing information, sharing data, so that we have that continuity. Ultimately, we want a seamless network, even though we have so many different parties involved. And again, I've gone on and on about the science plan and the tactical plan and the SAC and the SIP, but the landscape conservation cooperatives also have their own steering committees, and so there's a lot of different ways to plug into the information. So let's take a few minutes now and talk about the projects that were funded. It's been a very recent press release that Secretary Salazar released saying that $10 million was awarded for these 8 regional climate science centers, and the funding went to the universities or partners, again, to guide managers in parks, refuges, other resources in planning on how to help species and ecosystems adapt to climate change. So that's the overarching goal, and I do have a copy of that press release with me if you'd like to see it. And I wanted to give you a perspective nationwide of the types of projects. There were 69 total studies funded, and it's a very diverse range of things that were funded. I mean, studies on sea level rise, studies on how climate will affect vegetation, how these changes will affect valued species, how water availability will affect both people and ecosystems. And there are several studies across the nation that also evaluate the effects on resources of concerns to Native Americans, and being able to use the traditional ecological knowledge, again, for adaptive planning. And for the South Central Climate Science Center, these are the list of the particular studies that were funded. We're looking at terrestrial connectivity across the South Central U.S., and Kristen Baum is the principal investigator for that. Delineation of fresh, intermediate, brackish, and saline marshes in the Gulf of Mexico. Steve Hartley is a USGS investigator. The occurrence and variation in submerged aquatic vegetation, and that principal investigator is a USGS employee, Megan Lapierre. There's only one RFP. So just the way the funding routes is, University of Oklahoma is the host university. So if it was a USGS project, the money goes from Department of Interior to USGS and then directly to the USGS PIs. The other group of funds that have university PIs, the funds go to University of Oklahoma and then are distributed.
And it was an RFP, so it was competitive then?
Yes, that's correct.
Did the ones going to Oklahoma to the university, did they go through USGS or directly from Interior to?
They go through USGS first. And it was a competitive process, and there was peer review on the, oh gosh, how many? I mean, it was a very, very short timeline. I mean, we only had a month or so for the whole process to occur.
Kim, you may cover this later on, but don't you have private sector partners also, or is that not included in your funding?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think from the standpoint that round we didn't have any private sector entities.
So our center was set up in March 1st of this year, and so the funding cycle had to be done by a certain time. So the USGS, for the 3 new climate science centers that were set up this year, did a fast round of funding, and USGS made it only eligible for USGS offices and the members of the consortium that I'll talk about later. But the intent is in this next call, it would be broader. So if a private company wanted to work with the University of Oklahoma, for example, or Texas Tech, then there would be opportunities.
I mean, I think there would certainly be a role. And the key is partnering either with one of the university entities or USGS for that. But Renee makes a good point. This particular RFP, the timeline on it was so short, we were pretty limited in our approach. A couple of the other projects that were funded in 212 for the South Central area were expert workshop to build climate science center expertise in understanding the social and communication dimensions of climate change. Dennis Patterson at Texas Tech is the PI for this. But I would add with this one, for all of the science and models and strategies that we can develop, the best science that we can produce, we still need to consider the social aspects. Because regardless of how good our science is, at some point policy decisions have to be made. So for our center, I think it's going to be really critical that we do evaluate the social science component of it. Because ultimately, how people consume that information, how the public uses that information, what they understand about it, and the drivers, what do they care about, will ultimately be driving a lot of the decisions that are made on the landscapes. So this is not something that we want to overlook with this center. And also evaluating the assumption of stationarity and statistical downscaling. Catherine Hayhoe at Texas Tech, Keith Dixon, and John Lazante at the NOAA's Geophysical Fluids Dynamics Lab are the PIs for that. We also have an intertribal workshop on climate variability and change. Dr. Laurel Smith is, we're lucky enough to have her here with us today, so she'll give you a lot more details on that particular project. And then synthesizing eco-hydrology models as a management tool for landscape conservation. Dr. Shannon Brewer is the PI for that. And basically what that does is take some of the hydrology models and the ecosystems models and interface them together. And if you want to, there's a paragraph or so description of each of these if you want to take a look at that link, and that'll give you a little more detail on any of these that you'd like more information on. So working together. It's in my picture. We were at a meeting in Lubbock last week, so we stopped and took a few pictures. So working together, I mean, again, this is all about the partnerships and being able to produce something together that's better than just one individual. I mean, these are very complex problems, and they're going to take a complex and type of science and the partnerships to address them. Just a reminder again of the landscape conservation cooperative boundaries. So we're working across a lot of different types of landscapes, but again, each one of those LCCs has a steering committee. They all have a little different driver. They function a little differently, just on how they were developed. But again, each has a science committee, each has a steering committee, each has a coordinator, and then a science coordinator as well. So I think Amy will give us a little bit better perspective on some of the details of that. And then just the conceptual model on how we work together. Again, we want this to be a stakeholder and ground up. So the LCCs, again, participate with this group. They're going to help synthesize what type of assessments need to be done, what types of science need to be done. The agencies, tribes, NGOs, private landowners, I mean, they help in the planning and analysis, decision making. What are the adaptation needs that we need the science to address? And there's also a lot of monitoring and data collection occurring in this realm. And if you notice, they all overlap as well. And then ultimately, the Climate Science Center should be producing science and modeling tools to help us address not only predicting what might happen, but evaluating different types of tools to better know how to adapt to the changing science, to the changing climate. So we want to begin with the user's needs. We want to give priority to the process over the product. Again, having the partnerships built and the communication. We want to seek an institutional stability and develop, I mean, right at the moment, the funding is kind of setting the stage, the funding coming from the Department of Interior, but we want to be able to grow this institutionally into something that's stable, that really produces products relative to the South Central area. And we want a process that's capable of learning so that we continue, we don't keep making the same mistakes. We learn as we grow, and again, the adaptive management tools and techniques are out there. And also, I mean, how would we judge? I've been asked this a couple times, well, how do you know if you're successful in this? So we want science and information that's considered by the usables credible, legitimate, actionable, things that you can use to make decisions. We want the process to engage the scientists and the decision makers in mutual learning and production of a knowledge that we couldn't develop on either side alone. For example, with that, I mean, as a federal employee or in USGS, we get a certain amount of appropriated funds. Now, I might be able to do a little cost share or something like that to bring some reimbursable funds in, but basically, that's the funding we get. But at the university, they can apply for NSF or NOAA, NASA grants. So we can bring together funding for the students and for the postdocs, things that one of us alone may not be able to do. We want the process that yields increased mutual understanding, respect, and trust amongst those stakeholders. And we want the decision makers to determine that the decisions were indeed improved by virtue of the science support provided by the Climate Science Center. So there's my contact information, and
would only be, from my private sector standpoint, if somebody's willing to pay for it, okay, and that's your credibility right there. So free information, how do you gauge the accuracy and validity of the data sets? You put out there, you hope somebody's going to use them. But in the private sector world, if you don't have valid information, they're not gonna pay for it. So just wanted to make that comment.
From the, I mean, that is actually one of the things, and I'm glad you bring that point up. I worked in private industry for 15 years and was a consultant for 2 years after that. And you bring up a very valid point. One of the things within USGS, and the majority of the information should be passing through USGS, is the database and just our fundamental science practices. Everything that is generated, we have a data management plan and metadata so that anybody else, because it's all public information as well. And then everything is peer reviewed, blind peer reviewed by people either internal or external to the agency that is an expert in that field. But the private sector too, I mean, again, I'm listening closely because, I mean, I do think there's probably a role there. And
Well, I'll tell you, I was at Los Alamos National Laboratory before I started my company. One of the big reasons was the public domain data are not fine enough to apply for any applications that we're trying to solve, drought conditions and things like that. You don't have enough resolution to really make sense out of it. So the point I make at these conferences is that the government putting out data sets, not necessarily for the end users, but maybe for those who take the data and actually make more valuable data sets out of it at the end. So that confusion is there, and a lot of data users, as end users, may not actually know that.
right.
But that needs to be really emphasized by the government agencies and the private sector folks that take the data and actually make something out of it that's more useful.
Well, and I think I would see that as one of those. I mean, matter of fact, we had a conversation this morning, and that was exactly at the LTERs and bringing those data together, scrubbing them so that the data were comparable across. But again, I'm very sensitive to what you're saying because, not all water, it's easy to go out and take a water quality sample, but it depends on if it's the Blue Thumb volunteer group taking it or if you've gone to a 2-week class to learn how to do part per billion protocols. But once it's in a database, people don't necessarily ask that question. They just average, if it's a pH value, they just average all the numbers together, or if it's a phosphorus number, or if it's an atrazine number. They may or may not ask, what was your flow? The data may or may not have been collected related to the flow at that site. So having the data out there, one thing, but people knowing the value, or I shouldn't say the value, but the accuracy of the data, the resolution of the